Good afternoon, everyone. As you're all aware, conversations here in the state capitol continue to revolve around the budget crisis and our poor financial situation as portrayed by the comments from the rating agencies. It's important to note that year after year, lawmakers and the governor struggle to find the revenue to fund an ever-growing list of state programs. Unfortunately, little attention is paid to the actual results that those programs achieve. As this report outlines, in order to get our fiscal house in order, long-term budget reforms are necessary. Budget reforms that focus on performance and priorities rather than simply assuming that every line item in the budget is guaranteed a permanent space there. Performance-based budgeting allows appropriators to focus spending where it has a real impact on programs that work for people rather than on political priorities. As outlined in our report that we have released, the Commonwealth can and should focus on identifying clear performance measures for programs so that we're able to accurately assess the effectiveness of the programs that we fund with tax dollars. This is how the private sector budgets work, by measuring performance and funding those things that work. And I have signs in my office, and I'm a big believer, if it can't be measured, it can't be managed. Our first step in Pennsylvania towards long-term solvency is to begin measuring. Our goal as lawmakers shouldn't be simply to fund programs because they exist, but to fund programs because they work, by identifying what success looks like and then measuring it year after year. We should be providing funding for those programs that achieve results, and we should cease funding to programs that fail to achieve their goals. This is not a short-term fix, nor an easy one. Senator Mensch, who wanted to be here with us today but was unable to be here because of a scheduling conflict, is currently working on a performance-based budgeting proposal. Additionally, Senators Falmer and Eichelberger held a joint hearing where national groups were consulted regarding Pennsylvania's budgeting issues, including a look at best practices from around the country, such as performance-based, priority-based, and biannual budgeting. And biannual means a 2-year budget. We look forward to working with them and others to develop performance metrics and priorities that work for Pennsylvanians so that we're able to fund a government that works rather than a government that just talks about working. Last year, we went through a very long budget process, and it boils down to this, that I prepared these last year that every every family of 4 would be faced with a tax increase of $1,420. We were able to hold the line on spending, and each family of 4 saved $1,420. And $1,400 is a lot of money to a lot of people. The group behind me and my colleague, Representative Grove, Seth Grove from York, have been working on all these potential savings for months. And I applaud the other senators and House members that have become part of our caucus that have worked on coming up with ideas to make Pennsylvania more financially stable. So at this time, thank you, and I'll turn the microphone over to Representative Grove to discuss the potential savings that the caucus has identified. Seth? Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Before we begin, I'd like to thank my colleagues here, both House members and senators, and also Stan Saylor, I believe, introduced the performance-based budgeting as chairman of Policy Committee 2008-2009. He's been working very, very digitally, and I believe coordinating with Bob Mensch as well. It's a great policy, and hopefully we can move that forward. And I'd also like to thank the taxpayers joining us today and organizations across the state who are looking for alternatives rather than just the tax you more approach. As Senator Wagner mentioned, the Taxpayers Caucus is a bicameral group of legislators that came together for one shared purpose: to protect the taxpayers through prudent budgeting, fiscal policies, and to change the way that Harrisburg approaches budgeting year after year. For far too long, budgeting in the Commonwealth has been set on autopilot. Increases in spending have been made over the past several years and the past 2 decades. Increased taxes of some form or another have frequently been a topic of conversation during each of our budget cycles, just as they are again this year. For instance, Governor Tom Wolf has proposed $2.7 billion in taxes for the next fiscal year, and despite his insistence on taking more money out of everyone's pocket, according to his own budget secretary, those taxes would lead to higher taxes in future years. And you can see the exactly what the Governor Wolf is spending. There's also a footnote in the governor's budget about a tipping fee increase that is not also present on that list as well. Today, the Taxpayers Caucus is releasing its report, which does four things. One, discusses the structural deficit argument and realization that it's actually a cyclical deficit, makes recommendations on how to improve the budget process, makes recommendations on how to enhance revenues through economic growth rather than tax increases, and identified over $3 billion of savings in non-tax revenue. That's right, the report identifies $300 million more in savings in non-tax revenue than Governor Wolf has proposed in tax increases for next fiscal year. I want to repeat that. This report identifies $300 million more in savings in non-tax revenue than Governor Wolf has proposed in tax increases. In total, our recommendations represent nearly 10% of the general fund budget for this current fiscal year. Summary of those are right there. Some are oldies and goodies. Tax amnesty program reintroduced by Marguerite Quinn. All the way down to, a simple savings of $43,000 from the state police. Our policy recommendations come from a number of sources, including Governor Tom Wolf, who I applaud and has actually done a great job of actually finding, if you go through his budget book, his press releases, they're actually very good at finding savings in the Commonwealth. Auditor Eugene DePasquale, who was obviously just here. Fiscal notes from Senate and House Appropriations Committee, as well as legislation proposed by our colleagues. What you will find throughout this report is essentially a culture shift towards fighting for taxpayers instead of how to find ways to take more of their money. Harrisburg should not utter one more word about the need for additional revenue enhancements or recurring revenue until we address the cost drivers of our budget and turn over every rock to save every single one of the taxpayers' pennies. We approach our report with a simple thought, that no amount of savings, no matter how small, should be overlooked. You'll find our suggested savings ranges from $43,000 to simply order house the state police prints their tickets, to a large number of policy proposals aimed at improving the efficiency of the Department of Human Services, totaling nearly $1 billion. And remember, these are savings, not cuts. Not once have we asked for a single cut in any department moving forward. While this is a first step, I believe this report reflects how we can manage our budget instead of having our budget manage us moving forward. Additionally important is requiring the Wolf administration to reconcile their expenditures from the budget impasse. It's been months since we stood on this stage to question how the Wolf administration had been spending taxpayer money through the budget impasse. His administration hid their questionable spending behind vaguely worded waiver requests to use lapsed funding, and the taxpayers have no idea what their money was spent on. We support Auditor General DePasquale for auditing the impasse spending, and we thank Appropriations Chairman Pat Brown and Bill Adolph for requesting the audit. Policymakers today are being asked to pass a budget without knowing where money has been spent. Members of the Taxpayers Caucus stand ready to work with our colleagues in the House and Senate, as well as the governor. But we must do so with a new approach that is focused on protecting taxpayers and make sure every effort to rein in government spending in Harrisburg. As Chairman Adolph says, $1 saved this fiscal year is $2 saved next fiscal year. As a member of the House Republican Caucus, I am also very proud that our caucus slogan is standing with taxpayers, not standing on taxpayers. We thank our leadership team for adopting this slogan. We work forward to working with them and the Senate and the governor to passing a taxpayer-friendly budget that meets the priorities of Pennsylvanians by June 30th. And a member of the House Republican Caucus is here, Brian Cutler. I asked him to come up and say a few words.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. When Seth first asked me, it came as a surprise because I've been forwarding him emails all along, most of which he already referenced, but I do want to highlight. I want to thank our colleagues in the House and the Senate for the work that they have done, and I also want to thank Governor Wolf for the efforts that he has made in terms of efficiencies and some of the improvements that he has made. For the last year and a half, this has been an area of interest for me because as he has talked about savings in his Go Time initiative, I think it's important to note that we need to recognize those savings in the budget. I think the governor's done an excellent job in bringing some of his managerial skills to government, making efficiencies, whether it's through procurement improvements through the Department of Corrections or improvements in PennDOT in terms of safety upgrades that will in fact be annual reoccurring savings as well. And as I sent all of these ideas to both Seth and our policy chairman, Carrie Benninghoff, in terms of the Penn Save program, I think it's important to recognize that we get the budget to recognize these financial savings. And I want to highlight how important this is, because one of the first questions that we've always asked is, how much money do we need to spend? That's a fair question, because we have a lot of services, we have a lot of areas. But I think the better question is, where have we already spent money? Where have we saved money? And then can we reallocate or reprioritize that money? Are there programs that are no longer inefficient or could be improved? And then, are there any other revenues that are there? This policy idea book is really a starting point for a better conversation, I think, in terms of how we will approach government, how we will solve our problems, and quite frankly, I think it's what the taxpayers expect us to do. Be good stewards of their dollars. Be good stewards and mindful of how we're spending, where we're spending, and what we're spending it on. Because I think we all agree that there are certain functions of government that must exist. Where we may disagree, and we need to have the conversation on, is where is that money best spent, where can it have the best impact, and who is in control of that spending? Is it us as the individual taxpayers, or is it government who wants to take the money and then spend it on their items? I do believe that we as individuals will drive our economy if given the opportunity and the ability to have that money. So we need to work and be efficient, be mindful of what we have been given in terms of the trust by the tax-paying public. And as we look through all of these efficiencies and we have these discussions, we then need to arrive at the conclusion of what does that budget look like. I think it can be bipartisan. As I said, I've publicly praised the governor dating back to town halls with Mike Sturla, my local Democrat representative in Lancaster City. We did an editorial board together, and I was quick to praise the governor on what he has been able to do in terms of efficiencies. But in order to recognize those efficiencies and those savings, we have to reconcile those lines, as my colleague just referenced. I think it's a good starting point. I want to thank them for their work, and I want to thank the governor for his work, because there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and I'm confident that we can bring it to a successful conclusion. With that, I'll turn it back to Representative Grove and Senator Wagner. Thank you.
Questions? Go.
A fairly large number here, 153 million, comes from reforming state health care costs. Isn't that a negotiable item that would have to be done with the unions at the negotiating table?
Yeah, some of that is negotiable. The Wolf administration could do that upon their next renegotiation, or we could pass a state law that would make that into effect upon the next contract. There's two ways to do that.
And if you pass that law, they would have to accept that?
Yeah. Yep.
Do you know how much of what's here is already programmed into what the governor sent to the legislature?
If you pull up the governor's budget book, none of these are actually calculated in anything within the governor's budget book. None of it.
Not even $500 million in Medicaid savings
Yes.
for Medicaid expansion that happened 2 years ago?
Yeah, none of that was programmed in. And that's what he's calling on this year. That was in this year's budget book. He said he saved $500 million in Medicaid expansion. That was his number this fiscal year, this budget.
So you're not saying that he can save another $500 million for next fiscal year?
What I'm saying is he never calculated that in. He says he saved it, but those numbers aren't actually accounted for in the governor's budget booklet at all.
I guess we've explained what's going on. They understand what's going on.
Yeah, Dennis.
Do you guys not buy that having private pension managers actually makes significantly more money? Glenn Grell said that they make way more by using it. It ends up being an efficient use because the returns they bring in far outweigh what they're paying. You don't find that?
So I think you have to look at the management of the systems. I mean, CSRS just hired Illinois' kind of finance guru, and Illinois' pensions are actually far worse than what we are. His return on investments are lower than what we've had. That's an issue, and that's a management issue within those plans. I think Josh Shapiro from Montgomery County showed that you can do those pension reforms. And again, these are options that we're putting on the table. Let's have a discussion. Let's look at these options, A, before we head over to B, because B is just extracting more treasury from taxpayers to the tune of billions of dollars. Let's look at this to see what we can gauge as far as savings and efficiencies before we enter into conversation number B.
How are you reducing debt $10.6 million? Is that like a refinancing?
Yeah, that's part of a debt restructuring with RCAP. I believe it's Mentzer's bill and Tara Tullhill's bill to try to reduce overall debt load moving forward by those reforms.
On the pension reform item, you're talking about the private management fees paid by CSRS and PSRS.
Mm-hmm.
And so would you envision a law, legislation saying PSRS and CSRS you cannot pay?
That's an option. I don't know what role the governor would have in enforcing that as well. And obviously that he put that on the table when he first came into office as a way to cost save and put more money into the pensions rather than paying the private management fees.
But every lawmaker.
Yeah, actually, you want to hit that?
The reality is that, number one, our pension management fees, for the approximately $70 billion should be 35 basis points. We're currently paying 137 basis points. I mean, we could save a tremendous amount of money. But there's another conversation that's not being held right now, and we need to talk about the 7.5 performance goal that's been set. It's simply unreasonable and unsustainable. 2 weeks ago, I watched the show with Bill Gates, wealthiest man in the world. He has a private foundation. He stated on CNBC that last year, and trust me, I'm familiar with some of his money managers, he was able to achieve a 6% return. We're falling behind. And so, if we're only achieving 3% and the benchmark and all the numbers are based on 7.5%, the whole thing just continues to get worse and worse. And I don't have this is a huge learning curve up here, but what investments are we in? What have we invested in? Are we in a lot of private equity investments? And a lot of times private equity investments are similar to going to the racetrack sometimes. But this is just a whole nother area that needs to be looked at. But there's a lot of opportunity, in the pension side. But again, I think that we have made so many promises here in Pennsylvania that it's simply unsustainable. This past Friday night, I was at an event where Congressman Pitts is retiring from Congress, and he talked about the promises that the federal government made, and it was a wild number that was thrown out there. But what we owe, future and everything, and I don't know whether this includes all states, but I'm working on it. I heard a number of $235 trillion. And what comes after trillion? I mean, it just continues to grow. But I think what we're doing here, number one, the group that's behind me, and the House and Senate members, and a lot of outside resources, we're doing something that has never been done before. We're turning over rocks. This is what is done in the private sector every single day. Ideas. Now, we're throwing out $3 billion, and I use the word potential. But if of the $3 billion we realize $1.4 billion or $1.7 billion, we've achieved something. And I think that nothing is measured up here in Harrisburg at all. I don't see it at all. I mean, the Auditor General just had a press conference on the child hotline. There were 42,000 calls that were dropped or unanswered last year. Well, it seems like a great big number, but I'm sitting back there with my calculator, and at the end of the day, it's only 500 calls a day, 530 calls a day. Yeah, I understand that children and helping children is most important, but maybe we need to be managing what we're doing and the people that are handling it. But if you want to break it down, you take 42,000 calls divided by 365 days a year. That's 531 calls divided by 79. It boils down to 1.5 more calls per day per person that's employed in that department. And so I think this is a new day. And when I came to Harrisburg last year, we weren't asking deep diving questions. This year during the appropriation process and with the help of Senator Grove and his colleagues and my colleagues in the Senate, we're turning rocks over. You're going to hear that term, turning rocks over. And what that means is turning a rock over and finding pennies and nickels and quarters, because that's what we do in the private sector each and every day. So again, this is a new day. And I don't think that Harrisburg has seen this before, and this is exciting. I also think that there's something pretty interesting that I think that all House and Senate members are starting to look at this, whether it doesn't matter what party you're from. And I think when you start seeing the numbers, it tells the story. And where we are today, and I'm the first probably to blame Governor Wolf for a lot of things, but I will tell you that where we are today is a result of 35 years of doing the same thing. 35 years of, really you think back 35 years is 1975. It's not that long ago. It's year after year doing the same thing over and over. We have to change. Pennsylvania has so many opportunities to be so financially strong, and this is the first step.
And to go back to the welfare question, I actually asked, as a member of the House Appropriations Committee, I asked the Secretary about the savings in DHS. I still have not received any answers from that department on clawback money from counties who hand back money and a 6-year analysis of that, as well as specific line by line where those savings occurred within their $500 million today. And that was a couple months ago. Still today have not received anything from DHS on any of the questions from those appropriations hearings.
On the private management fees and PSERS and SERS, though, are you saying that the state could immediately lower its transfer to those pension funds by $600 million?
It depends.
By $600 million if the retirement systems.
The governor's analysis basically says you can get $600 million of savings if you go over to private management fees and put it into, I don't know, Vanguard. I think the senator has met and has done a lot of work on that as well.
But you believe that that would be an immediate reduction of the state's transfer to those annual transfers?
There may be management contracts in place. There's a lot of complexity, and I don't know how many different money managers you have. But I'll tell you what we do in the private sector. We have a financial problem. If I had a financial problem in my company, I would call in my bankers. I would call in all of my partners, because they're partners, because if I go down the tubes, they're going down too. I would bring all the pension managers in and say, gentlemen, we have a problem, and we need some help. Would you be willing to trim your fees by 30 basis points? Guaranteed they'll do it in a heartbeat, but nobody's doing that. That's the problem up here. There are many times in business, if you ask, and it isn't what you ask, it's how you ask. And we have a problem. And I mean, money managers know the problem we have, and they want to continue to do business with Pennsylvania. I'm just telling you that nobody's sitting down at the table, bringing everybody in and saying, we need help.
Go Time has $158 million. That was the governor's initiative, right?
Yes.
But he hasn't accounted for that in the budget?
No, under nowhere in the governor's budget book or the annual report, the Commonwealth Annual Financing Report, is there any actual accounting for the savings within it. Some of it is procurement. So Department of State will do procurement contracts, save money for actual entities, and that all needs to be accounted for. I mean, and that's off the governor's press release's website about how much money they've saved. So I haven't seen it in the governor's budget book. I read all 997 pages. So
what happened to that money?
What do you believe happened there? Is this money that was just turned around and they spent it?
I don't know. As far as I'm aware, I did not see any expenditures as far as go time. I did not see any subtraction. I did not see any expenditures. As far as I'm aware, that money is still available to be utilized for this fiscal year.
I think something that people need to realize that government is growing like crazy. I mean, we hired 400 additional people in the Department of Corrections last year. I mean, if you go around, DHS is hired. There are a lot of additional people that have been hired, and I think if you look at the net hires, the net hires after retirements are somewhere in the 2,500 range. The other problem that we have here in Harrisburg, in the private sector, we look at benefits as a percentage of of what it is against a dollar of payroll. We call it burden. If you take all the benefits in the private sector, virtually there is no one on the planet that has benefits as a percentage of dollar payroll over 50%. The liquor store system is 89.9%. And the judiciary, magistrates, judges, 100%. The Department of Corrections approaching 80%. It's unsustainable. And this isn't, in the private sector, when expenses go up, we call it expense creep. Well, this isn't expense creep. This is like an expense rocket ship up here. These benefits that are being paid as a percentage of payroll are out of control, and probably are if you looked at all agencies, it's somewhere between $1.5 and $2 billion more than the private sector would be paying if you factored just 50%. And there are some companies that run 35%, 38%. At our company, we're in the 45 to 46% range, and that is fully loaded with everything, and that's a very generous percentage.
Good. All right, as these people need to get to caucus and we need to debate bills on the floor, we're going to have to unfortunately cut this off. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it again, the taxpayers and my caucus members standing up for taxpayers first, and thank everybody for their participation.
Wonderful.